Nathan DeForest first arrived at the edges of Redwood National Park in search of silence and a second chance. His life in the city had dissolved into hectic days and sleepless nights, overshadowed by the grief of losing his father. The old man had passed unexpectedly, leaving Nathan unmoored, searching for purpose, direction, and a way to ease the pain that gnawed at him. The pine-scented breezes and towering canopies of the California redwoods promised him something rare: refuge. It wasn't a glamorous move by any means. The cabin he took over belonged to his father's best friend, who was more than happy to let it to Nathan at a pittance, hoping it might help him heal. Outside, the forest's hush felt alive, like a green cathedral teeming with secrets. Nathan arrived on an early summer afternoon, the air warm and tinged with cedar, his heart fluttering with a nervous hope. The cabin itself was humble, a simple, single-room wood structure with a stone fireplace that might have once been charming in a storybook sense. A worn leather couch sat near a creaking floorboard that squeaked each time you walked over it. Bright beams of sunlight filtered through two small windows, dancing dust motes swirling in their golden glow. The front door faced a clearing that spilled into a series of winding trails, leading deeper into the labyrinth of old-growth redwoods. Nathan remembered seeing pictures of these majestic giants when he was a child. His father, a devoted naturalist, would leaf through magazines and remark how the place possessed a kind of sacred hush. Standing there, gazing at those gargantuan trunks, Nathan felt as if he were inside a cathedral older than time itself. The first few nights alone were far from serene. Unfamiliar forest noises drifted in from every angle. Owls called in the darkness, insects chittered, and the wind licked the cabin walls with an eerie, unpredictable rhythm. At times, a crashing sound from somewhere outside the clearing made his heart race, sending him fumbling for the flashlight that he kept by his bedside. In these moments, a strange blend of fear and awe clutched him, as though the ancient forest were a living being, testing his courage. Yet all Nathan could think of when he closed his eyes was his father's voice, gently encouraging him that the wild was not to be feared, but cherished and respected. Over and over, he recited that mantra until his anxiety softened into exhausted sleep. On the fifth night, a series of thuds against the exterior logs jolted Nathan from a fragile slumber. He rose from the bed, heart hammering, grabbed his flashlight, and crept across the cabin floor. Slowly, he eased the front door open. Nothing but the impenetrable dark greeted him. The only sound was his breath, ragged in the cold air. He flicked the flashlight this way and that, bracing for a pair of glowing eyes or some snarling beast. Instead, he noticed fresh claw marks etched into the damp earth by the woodpile. They were broad, with 5 distinct digits. Bear, he thought, his pulse still thundering in his ears. Yet the tracks weren't pointed in a threatening manner. They circled around, almost as if the creature had been pacing near the cabin, standing guard rather than attempting to break in. Morning found Nathan investigating the yard with cautious curiosity. He discovered the same wide paw prints pressed into the soft ground around the cabin's perimeter. Though the idea unnerved him, something about the tracks made him recall a story his father once told. A black bear had lingered near one of his dad's old campsites for weeks, always keeping a respectful distance, never showing aggression. Perhaps, Nathan speculated, this was another old forest resident, more inquisitive than hostile. Not that this entirely set his mind at ease. A bear was still a bear, and carelessness could lead to disaster. From that day forward, Nathan took precautions. He hung his trash in odor-proof bags away from the cabin, kept the perimeter free of food scraps, and installed a few makeshift noise alarms from cans and string small measures to avoid a surprise encounter. Despite his vigilance, the bear kept coming back. Night after night, Nathan would hear a soft scraping, a low grunt, or the faintest rustle of undergrowth. Some mornings he woke up to see new impressions in the fresh dew, sometimes just a single track, sometimes multiple. Once, he caught a glimpse of the creature's silhouette in the moonlight, a hulking, shadowy mass gliding across the clearing, surprisingly quiet for an animal of its size. Nathan's chest tightened in awe and a tinge of fear. He whispered an uncertain greeting out into the darkness. The bear paused, lifted its snout, and huffed softly, a sound that somehow set Nathan's heart at ease. Then it lumbered off. He barely caught his breath before drifting back to bed, adrenaline warring with a strange sense of calm. Over the following weeks, an unspoken agreement seemed to form between the man and the bear. Nathan realized it wasn't rummaging through his things or stalking him out of hunger. If anything, it behaved like a sentry, circling the cabin at intervals, even stopping near the threshold as though checking on him. During the day, Nathan would wander the forest in search of fallen branches for firewood or pockets of edible plants. He was determined to live off the land as much as possible. He carried a notebook his father had once used, filled with meticulously drawn sketches and notes about the local flora and fauna. Each page was dog-eared with smudges of dirt, a testament to how these redwoods had always been a haven for the older man. Returning to the cabin each evening, Nathan increasingly felt less lonely. It was as if he had a silent companion out there, watching over him in its own mysterious way. One afternoon, as Nathan was washing up at the creek, he felt the uncanny sensation of being observed. Sure enough, across the rippling water, the black bear stood motionless, its dark eyes locked onto him. The forest was hushed, not a single bird calling. Heart drumming, Nathan slowly knelt, scooped a handful of creek water to rinse his face. When he looked up again, the bear made a small chuffing noise and turned away, disappearing into the underbrush. For a moment, Nathan remained on the bank, stunned by how unafraid he felt. Yes, there was still caution, but it was overshadowed by a sense of kinship that defied explanation. He wondered if in some strange cosmic resonance, his father's presence in the redwoods was guiding this gentle giant to look after him, or if the bear itself was dealing with a loneliness of its own. As summer waned, and autumn's auburn and gold replaced the lush greens of the forest, Nathan settled into a more comfortable rhythm. He upgraded parts of the cabin, patched a hole in the roof, mended a broken window latch, and built makeshift shutters to guard against the coming winter rains. With each improvement, he felt a small surge of pride, a sense that he was finally caring for himself in a way he'd never managed in the city. He found solace in the slow work of his hands splitting logs, braiding rope from fibrous bark, even sketching the glimpses of wildlife that passed through the clearing. Somewhere in that process, he felt his grief morphing from a raw, searing wound into something that demanded reflection and respect rather than daily torment. Every evening, without fail, the bear returned. Sometimes Nathan watched from the window as the hulking silhouette crossed the clearing, gave the cabin a once-over, and stationed itself against the trunk of a large redwood or at the edge of the clearing. It was as though the bear was on patrol, ensuring no dangers approached. Nathan would often stay up late, reading his father's notes or simply listening to the forest's lullaby. On particularly cold nights, with the wind howling around the eaves, he'd shiver at the thought of his silent guard out there, braving the elements. He would mutter a soft prayer of thanks and wonder. The next morning, he'd check to see if there were fresh prints, which invariably there were, large half-moons stamped in the mud, or dusting of pine needles. Eventually, curiosity got the better of Nathan. He decided to leave an offering, a small tin of honey he had brought from the city, set just outside the cabin's porch. He wasn't sure if this was wise or foolish, but it felt like a gesture of trust. That night, he lay in bed, heart pounding at the slightest noise. A few hours later, he heard gentle snuffling and the scrape of claws on the porch. Then a quiet grunt. Peering out through a crack in the door, he saw the bear sniffing the tin, tipping it over to lap up its sweet contents. Instead of finishing everything, it licked what it wanted and left the remainder behind. A wave of warmth coursed through Nathan's chest. Some part of him interpreted that as the bear returning the gesture, refusing to take all he had offered. He drifted off to sleep wearing a fragile, hopeful smile, Then, in late autumn, a savage storm swept across the park. Winds howled like restless spirits, and rain hammered the forest floor, turning trails into slick mud. Inside the cabin, water trickled through a few unpatched roof seams and pooled on the kitchen table. Nathan scrambled, setting pots and bowls to catch the leaks. Lightning lit up the night, revealing monstrous silhouettes of the ancient redwoods, swaying dangerously. The thunder that followed was a primeval roar that rattled the very bones of the cabin. Nathan felt utterly alone and vulnerable, heart pounding at the possibility of trees toppling or the roof caving in. Between thunderclaps, he thought he heard a faint scratching at the door. When he finally mustered the courage to open it, the storm nearly wrenched it from his grip. Rain stung his face, and wind whipped the hair across his eyes. Through the pelting water, he glimpsed the bear huddled under the eaves, drenched and shivering. He stepped back, astonished at the creature's trust and desperation. The bear was clearly seeking shelter from the wrath of the storm. Carefully, Nathan reached out a trembling hand. The bear stepped forward an inch, water cascading off its fur in torrents. For a moment, man and beast locked eyes, each acknowledging the other's vulnerability. Nathan backed into the cabin, leaving the door ajar, and made a hasty decision to create a dry spot near the fireplace. He moved furniture aside, threw down some old blankets, and coaxed the frightened animal in with soft, soothing murmurs. His voice, cracking with adrenaline, repeated, "It's okay, come in." With surprising caution, the bear shuffled forward. It was larger than he'd ever realized, nearly the size of a small sofa. The cabin felt tiny, dwarfed by the powerful presence of this forest guardian. For hours, they waited out the storm. The fireplace sputtered and glowed, doing its best against the howling wind. The bear lay curled on the blankets, occasionally letting out a low huff or groan as thunder rattled the windows. Nathan wondered if it remembered storms from its youth, or if the fury of lightning still shook it to its core. It was an inconceivable scene. A man and a wild bear, side by side, forced together by the relentless might of nature. Despite his trembling limbs, a part of Nathan felt an immense gratitude that this giant creature trusted him enough to enter his world and allowed him to enter its own. He whispered words he wished he could say to his father. "I'm okay. I'm safe. And I'm so glad you're here." By the time dawn broke, the storm had dwindled to a steady drizzle. Pale, gray light seeped through the windows, revealing a disheveled cabin and puddles of water in every corner. Nathan rose from his spot near the fireplace, stiff and bleary-eyed, only to find the bear awake, watching him. Slowly, it lumbered to its feet, shook the water from its coat, and ambled toward the open door. There, it paused, turning its head back, as if to offer a small nod or silent farewell. Then, with regal composure, it disappeared into the hazy morning rain. Nathan stood by the door for a long time, tears surprising him as they welled in his eyes. He wasn't entirely sure why he was crying, perhaps a mix of relief, awe, and the poignant realization that he was not as alone as he had believed. In the following days, the storm's devastation became clearer. Trails were blocked by fallen branches, and a few smaller redwoods had cracked under the ferocious wind. Nathan did his best to clear a path, using a worn steel chainsaw he found stored in a nearby shed. This battered old chainsaw was a real name brand, tool his father had always sworn by steel equipment when out in the wilderness. Each time the blade revved to life, Nathan thought of his father's big, calloused hands and that unwavering grin whenever he conquered a physical task. The memory stung, but it also fueled him, urging him to press on. The cabin's yard was strewn with debris, pine needles, and soggy leaves. The work was backbreaking, but each cut, each cleared log, felt like another step toward reclaiming his resilience. During this labor, he caught fleeting glimpses of the bear. Once, he saw it prowling on a ridge near the tree line, nose in the air, sniffing the wind. It caught sight of him, and for a suspended moment, They locked eyes again. Nathan hesitated, about to call out in greeting, but the bear turned away, silent as a ghost in the undergrowth. He couldn't help but feel a pang of something close to longing. Perhaps that night spent together during the storm had forged a deeper bond than he realized. Yet, it made sense that the bear would return to its natural rhythms, just as Nathan had his. Wild creatures belong to the forest, not to him, no matter how much solace they could share in an hour of vulnerability. With winter fast approaching, Nathan steeled himself for solitude. He fortified the cabin, further stuffing insulation into gaps, ensuring his small generator worked, stockpiling non-perishable goods. The days became shorter, the nights colder. Frost clung to the cabin's windows each morning, and the fireplace became a steady companion. Most evenings, Nathan read through his father's journal, rediscovering the older man's love for these woods. The pages recounted everything from sightings of Roosevelt elk to notes on the best vantage points to watch the sunrise. One entry, dated years before, struck him hard. It spoke of an encounter with a black bear that seemed oddly protective, circling his campsite at night, but never threatening. Perhaps, his father wrote, some animals sense our grief better than we realize. Maybe they guard us out of their own wounded places, forging silent connections that transcend fear. Upon reading this, Nathan felt a tightness in his chest, and the tears came swiftly. It was as though the thread of his father's life had entwined with his own in this remote corner of the world, manifested in the same gentle guardian. The days continued in a tranquil routine, broken only by daily tasks and the hush of snowfall that eventually arrived. A soft, powdery white blanketed the cabin, muting the entire forest. In that pristine stillness, Nathan found moments of joy, like the time he stepped out at dawn and saw deer tracks mingled with the bear's paw prints across the fresh snow, forming a tapestry of life, etched by nature's calligraphy. Each new discovery drew him deeper into communion with the forest. He began journaling, sketching, and collecting pine cones, as if capturing the forest's beauty might hold his father's memory close. He grew stronger, both physically and emotionally, chopping wood, hauling water, and learning to be content in the quiet. More than content, he found himself at peace. Still, the bear's nightly patrols left him both curious and comforted. Why did it remain so steadfast near his cabin? He suspected it might be driven by some primal instinct to watch over him. Or perhaps it was a coincidence. The bear's route simply happened to loop through his clearing, but that possibility rang hollow every time he peered out at night and saw the hulking form near his door, eyes reflecting amber in the moonlight, as if checking on him. He recalled the stormy night when the bear sought his shelter, remembering that trembling moment of shared vulnerability. Something intangible passed between them. Was it the spirit of his father, living on through the forest? Or was it simply two beings, one human, one wild, who recognized kindred loneliness in each other? One brutal evening, the temperature plummeted below freezing, and even the fireplace struggled to keep the cabin warm. Nathan huddled under layers of blankets. Just as sleep was pulling him under, he heard frantic scratching at the wall. Racing outside, flashlight bobbing in the icy wind, he found the bear in the snow, panting heavily. A jagged piece of deadfall lay nearby, blood smeared across its bark. The bear's fur was matted, with what looked like a fresh wound along its right shoulder, likely from stumbling into or dislodging that broken branch. Panic surged in Nathan's chest. Never had he imagined needing to tend to a wounded bear, but to his own astonishment, he approached slowly, whispering reassurance. The bear let out a raspy growl, half in pain, half in warning. Though his hands shook, Nathan recalled the simple first aid steps his father had taught him for wildlife emergencies, those that might at least stop bleeding, if an animal was docile enough to allow it. He gathered a small kit from the cabin: clean rags, antiseptic, strips of cloth to bind a wound. The cold air bit his cheeks as he inched closer. The bear eyed him warily, chest heaving. Step by step, Nathan approached, exhaling gentle words, speaking as if he were talking to a frightened child. "It's okay, big guy. I'm here." Strangely, the bear allowed it. Perhaps the pain and exhaustion had subdued it enough to accept help. Nathan pressed a rag to the bleeding shoulder, wincing at the animal's guttural moan. He dabbed antiseptic as gingerly as he could, then fastened a loose bandage. The forest was silent except for the bear's labored breathing. When he finished, he stroked the uninjured side of the animal's head gently. Then, after a few moments of rest, the bear trudged away, leaving blood-smeared paw prints in the untouched snow. Nathan stumbled back into the cabin, heart pounding with a mixture of shock and awe. He sank to the floor by the fireplace, tears brimming at the corners of his eyes. He couldn't quite grasp why he was crying so fiercely. Was it the relief that the bear might live, or the overwhelming gratitude for this unlikely bond? He thought of his father again, of how he'd always preached respect for all living things. In that memory, he felt something uncoil in his chest, a loosening of years of grief, shame, and self-doubt. Caring for this wild creature had become a mirror, showing him how far he'd come on his own path of healing. Over the next few days, tracks indicated the bear was healing slowly. It limped around the perimeter, but still made its nightly rounds. Though the bandage had fallen off, the bleeding seemed to have clotted. Nathan left out scraps of fish he caught in the nearby creek, carefully placing them at the foot of a tree. In response, the bear's footprints came closer each dawn, yet it never approached the porch as it had before. Nathan respected that distance, understanding that part of belonging to the wild was refusing to be owned. That distance, however, made what came next all the more devastating. A week later, Nathan woke to gunshots in the distance. His blood ran cold. Hunting was strictly regulated near Redwood National Park, and even then, firing shots so close to protected land was unusual. He darted outside, pulling on boots and coat haphazardly, and sprinted toward the sound. His breath hung in the air, each exhale a frantic puff. The gunshots echoed again, then stopped. By the time he reached a ridge overlooking the stream, his heart sank at the sight below. Two men in camouflage, one holding a rifle, stood over a fallen form, a bear. Nathan's stomach lurched in horror. Certain it was his guardian, he raced down the slope, ignoring the branches that clawed at his face and arms. When he arrived, chest heaving, he realized the men had shot a different bear, a smaller one, presumably a juvenile. Anger and sorrow burned in his eyes, and he shouted at them, referencing the park's restrictions. The men muttered a half apology, claiming they thought it was outside the protected area. They quickly disappeared, leaving the young bear lifeless in the snow. Nathan knelt beside it, tears burning paths down his cheeks. The creature's dark fur was frosted with ice crystals. His hands shook as he touched the cooling flank. In that moment, he wondered if the bigger bear was safe, if it had witnessed its own kin gunned down. He dug a makeshift grave, the cold earth resisting each stroke of his shovel. Hours later, exhausted and drenched in sweat, he laid the young bear to rest near a cluster of redwoods. Guilt and sadness gnawed at him, yet he also felt a searing clarity. Tragedy existed in every corner of life, even in these sacred forests. What mattered was how one responded, whether with numb acceptance or with fierce, compassionate action. With trembling hands, he patted the soil down, tears flowing unimpeded. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, voice ragged. In the following days, the familiar paw prints vanished from the clearing. Nathan spent his nights by the window, vigilantly searching for any sign of the black bear. None appeared. He walked trails, scanning for footprints or fur snagged on branches, but the forest offered no trace. He felt a growing dread that the bear might have been driven away by the gunshots, or, worse, harmed somewhere else. The bleak midwinter days seemed to fold around him like a gray shroud, and loneliness came roaring back with a vengeance. He fell asleep each night whispering silent prayers, half hoping for that gentle, lumbering presence to circle his cabin once more. Then, On a crisp morning when the sky flamed pink with dawn, he stepped outside and froze at the sight before him. There, in the snow by his porch, were fresh paw prints the same wide, five-toed impressions he'd come to know so well. They led in a semicircle around the cabin, just like before. A swirl of relief and joy rose in Nathan's chest, so fast it left him breathless. He followed the tracks to a small clearing where the morning light spilled across the snow, turning it into a pearlescent expanse. And there, perched on a fallen log, stood the black bear. Its shoulder fur had a ragged patch, evidence of the old wound, but it stood steady, head high. Nathan approached carefully, tears stinging his eyes. The bear let out a deep huff, not of aggression but of acknowledgement. He stopped a few feet away, uncertain if he should move closer. For a moment, neither man nor beast stirred. The forest seemed to hold its breath, and then, in a gesture that left Nathan trembling, the bear took a slow step forward, as though making sure he was safe. With tears streaming down his face, Nathan whispered, "Thank you for watching over me." In that quiet space, it was clear the bear had not simply guarded him out of idle curiosity. It had guarded him because, in some inexplicable, primal way, they had both recognized a shared heartbreak, a bond that defied human logic, and soared straight into the realm of empathy and grace. He extended a hand, not to touch but to show his open palm. The bear regarded him for a few seconds, then turned and ambled back into the forest shadows. Nathan stood there, snow crunching underfoot, heart raw with gratitude and sorrow, grateful for the time they had shared, sorrowful that he might never see the animal so closely again. Yet something about the bear's final glance over its shoulder told him their story was far from finished. The memory of it lingered like a silent benediction, stirring a quiet, fierce hope that in a world of pain and loss, connection could transcend even the greatest of divides. That day, Nathan returned to his cabin, a strange peace settling over him. He stoked the fire, made himself a cup of tea, and sat at the old wooden table. He pulled out his father's notebook, flipping to a blank page, and began writing his own entry, a tribute to a black bear that had guarded him through nights of fear and self-doubt. A single line, tears smudging the ink, read, "Even in the wild's darkest moments, kindness and loyalty can light the way." When he put down the pen, he allowed himself to weep openly, not merely from grief, but from an overwhelming sense of love and belonging he never thought he'd feel again. He wept for his father, for the innocent bear cut down by hunters, for the caretaker who had vanished into the forest, and for himself. The tears were cleansing, born of an understanding that life, in all its fragile beauty and brutality, is worth living wholeheartedly. In that unguarded moment, he finally understood what it meant to be truly alive, to open your heart to the untamed, the unpredictable, and to love it anyway. And so, the bear's footprints, etched into the snow around his cabin, became both a circle of protection and a symbol of his personal growth. In the hush of the redwoods, Nathan felt a sacred unity with the world around him, and, for the first time in a long, long while, he did not feel alone.